We're living in a time of complete and total deception. That's why there is such stringent control of history in both the schools and the seminaries.
How do you make sense of Native Americans who are existing on this land? They don't have any tales of modern architecture and things like this.
Pure genocide and coercion. That's how you get that narrative to be created. They write history books that includes other cultures' histories too.
Basically, everything that is taught in the mainstream is an inversion of what is true. There's a lot of evidence that there's nefarious agendas behind it.
In contrast to what the mainstream, mainline Christians believe, they all agree today we're waiting for Jesus to return. These Christians who are in the idea, well, what can I do? I just need to wait for Jesus to return. That's not what Jesus said. We can walk in Christ right here and manifest the kingdom on earth through us right now. Satan is a defeated enemy.
Paul, thank you so much for joining me, man. I would say, obsessively curious about the topics that we're going to get into today. I do not claim to be an expert or someone who is well-versed enough, knowledgeable enough on them to discuss them with any sort of quote-unquote authority, but I am incredibly curious about them. When I first came across what is colloquially known as Tartaria, we're talking about like old world architecture and a possible civilization that existed across the earth that had matching architectural styles and timelines that are completely off with respect to the historical narrative. I knew that there was a thread of truth there. Let's put it that way. But there was some of it where I was like, I don't buy like some of the narrative surrounding it. And I think that's, when you dive into some of the videos that have been put out that are become very popular, it becomes pretty easy to debunk elements of it. But there are some aspects of it where I'm like, this is incredibly questionable. And then when I came across preterism, which I know you're not a preterist, and we'll get into that. We'll get into what preterism is and like the difference between your perspective on Christianity and the preterist view, and then also the like traditional evangelical view, which is interesting because there's so many different denominations that they all can't actually agree on what the truth about the Bible and Christ's life is. But with that being said, that and the millennial reign and the idea that Christ has already returned and that we might be in the midst of what's called the little season right now. Again, threads of truth there. Something just rung true inside my body when I came across some of this stuff. So before we begin all that, I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name's Paul, and I run a YouTube channel called Understanding Conspiracy. I've been doing this since 2014, so over 10 years now. And I'm predominantly known as the author of the book, The Nephilim Look Like Clowns, and the creator of the same series, which I started in 2016, which is on the YouTube channel. But I also am quite well known, I'm kind of like a split focus channel for not by any like intention. It just kind of happened because in 2023, I published my first video on this topic you're discussing here, this whole millennial kingdom idea. And it's funny because I said to my moderator at the time, Ryan, I was like, I need to talk about this topic. Like I'm obsessed. Like I can't stop thinking about everything I'm like looking into here. But if I talk about it on my channel, it's going to take over. And I'm the Nephilim clown guy, and I've got a lot of work to do on that still. And I don't want it to like split focus. Anyway, it happened anyway, and it did. Then it's exactly what happened as I predicted. And it took over my channel for a good year and a half. And it kind of, a brand new movement just, boom, spiraled out of control. And not just because I was talking about it, because there was quite a few people suddenly starting to like rekindle the idea, because it kind of had its first YouTube debut, maybe like 3 or 4 years before I talked about it, from a few small channels that kind of touched on it, then left it. And it went silent for a few years. And I kind of brought it back up, and so did some other people. And we became like a community, talking with each other about it. And then people followed, build it and they'll come type of situation. And more people started hearing what we were saying, what we were thinking about this idea that, what if Jesus has already been here? And it's kind of, we're all looking for him to return and establish this millennial reign. And in some nebulous way, the eternal kingdom comes then, as we seem to think, but it's kind of, well, that's not what it says. And we read it just chronologically at the end of Revelation, and it's kind of like, it literally says there's a time where there's 1,000-year reign on earth, and then it ends when the 1,000 years has ended. Satan's let loose to deceive the nations and gather an army, Gog and Magog, from the four corners of the earth to make war with the camp of saints. And it was just a thought experiment, the first video. It's like, well, what if we're those people living in that time? how would we know? So I kind of fleshed that idea out and started to think about it. And other people resonated with the idea, and that video's on something like 750,000 views now. You know what I mean? It's still going viral now. It's out of my hands. It's completely out of control. And it's just the ramblings of a madman in his car talking to the camera saying like, what about this? What's going on here? Has anyone ever thought about this before? I mean, and I was just summarizing what I'd learned from other people, you know, like they were saying these things, that this and that. And obviously I kicked a hornet's nest. That's the only way to describe it. And like I said, a lot of people have joined this idea. And for a year and a half, I was there at the forefront of it, you know, doing the podcast interviews, spreading it. I talked to Eddie Bravo about this as well. David Nino, I got some big channels, you know, I was getting the message there. Eddie Bravo even shared it with Joe Rogan and shared my clip with him to try and get him to listen to the idea. And Joe Rogan just threw it off, said we'd have evidence that that's crazy, you know. And that's fair enough. I'm a conspiracy. I'm used to being called crazy, so whatever, it didn't matter to me, but it grew exponentially. And like I said, now that I get people like you and hundreds of people asking me questions and wanting me to talk about all these type of things. And I did for a long time, but I felt like I started to repeat myself after a year and a half. I was just saying the same thing over and over again on many different videos and podcasts. And as time went on, I think the movement itself got a bit strange too, and things started to happen. And this tends to happen when you're dealing with truth. I believe wholeheartedly it's the truth, you know, and I stand by it. But I no longer kind of make fresh videos about it anymore on my channel because it got dangerous. There's the only way to describe it, you know. And it's not because, like, I don't know, feds were coming after me or like the Illuminati knocked on my door and told me I better shut up about this or else. It's more like sycophantic zealot types were accusing me of being things I'm not, and practically saying I'm Satan himself or something. And what do you do when you're dealing with Satan? You know, there's only one way you got to deal with. You got to get rid of him, right? You know, so I didn't like being painted or plastered like that, you know, and neither did my family. And it's kind of like, I didn't want to put that pressure on them anymore. I'm quite thick skinned. It was kind of water off my back, but I can't expect everybody around me to be so laissez-faire about such a thing. And it's not fair to put that on them, you know? So it's kind of, look, I can't do this for my family's sanity and for my own sake. And I remembered that original thing I explained at the start. My channel is a spiritual warfare channel. I talk about the Nephilim clown thing. I reach people in places that this topic is great for, sure, but I'm reaching people in other places than was before this topic. And also my channel is an eclectic mix of conspiracy research. It's not just a little season channel, which it was becoming. So I kind of realized I need to stop doing that anyway and shift back to it being more of we talk about anything and everything on this channel. I have my Nephilim clown thing, which is my own unique creation, you know, that I nurture and grow and research into. But that little season thing will always have a place on my channel. I have a playlist there with hundreds of hours dedicated to getting the idea understood as best we can. I feel like I understand that conspiracy now. So I'm, you know, continuing on and onto other things, but that's me in a nutshell. I'm known for the Nephilim clown thing. Published a book a year ago, 5,000 copies sold. Working on the second installation now, and that should be the work finished. And yeah, the little season stuff. But other than that, I do talk about everything. I got my own podcast, The Truth of Therapy Sessions, where we talk about the truth of journey, waking up, telling friends and family, the struggles involved with that. I interview people, other channel members like yourself, you know, or content creators like yourself, and get them to share their stories on my channel. And I take interviews with people and ask them the issues they had, what they learned along the way. I give advice to help people kind of deal with telling friends and family as well, because it's just an explosive, horrible journey for a lot of people, and they make a lot of mistakes straight away when they first wake up. And I'm hoping to help those new people not make the mistakes we all made when we first woke up, you know, and push your friends and family away.
Well, I think a lot of people, when they're on this like quote unquote truth or journey, they land at a place where they feel demoralized, overwhelmed, pessimistic, black-pilled, and helpless. And my position is I've woken up to all of those things, right? Like all the dark things that you inevitably come across when you're waking up to the various aspects of, we could really say like evidence for the little season in some way, right? Basically everything that is taught in the mainstream is an inversion of what is true. And there's a lot of evidence that there's nefarious agendas behind it, that it's willful, that it's intentional. And I ultimately come to the perspective though, that the reason quote unquote, they are doing these things is because they realize how incredibly powerful we are when we are tapped in to our true selves and to God, the creator. And when we're in that relationship with the creator and with nature and with each other, we're unstoppable. And so I've shifted from focusing on what quote unquote they are doing and have focused more on why they're doing what they're doing. Because those deeper questions that you ask inevitably lead to you understanding that we've been severely misled on how powerful we truly are as individuals and as a collective. And I mean that from a physical and metaphysical sense. And it's completely shifted my focus, I guess you could say. But I totally get what you're saying, because I've been there too, where I'm just like, we're all screwed. This is too dark. This has not made my life better knowing this information. But I'm now past that, I'd say, for the most part.
Good. That's it. That's where I want people to get to myself, because I'm there too. I'm past it all. I'm whatever, and I don't care anymore. But I was there when I first kind of started to realize these dark, hidden truths about reality and the people who are working against us with these long-term agendas, which are literally crimes against humanity are being committed on a daily basis, and then it is black-pilling, terrifying. The world comes crashing in around you. The weight of the world suddenly on your shoulders, and you feel like you have to try and tell everybody and get them to see what you see. And you start slapping people, saying, "Do you see what I see? Look, it's right there." And they're looking at you like you lost your mind, And then you end up getting sectioned, ostracized. People push you away. You lose your friends. Your wife divorces you or something. Like everything goes terribly wrong. But your intentions were good. You're like, I just wanted to wake people up. And I come up with this practical advice. It's kind of like you have to learn some things. Like, not everybody wants to know. And that's okay, and you need to, a lot of self work needs to be done. And I'm not trying to get all new agey about this, but it'll say you need to.
It doesn't have to be though.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't have to be new agey either. It's like, no, it's important to do self work and have self reflection and self awareness and
absolutely
accountability for your thoughts, feelings, beliefs, words, actions. And, I actually have said this a number of times, I think on this podcast, if not at events, that when I was an evangelical Christian growing up, I was definitely one of those ones who did not behave very Christ-like throughout the week and went to church on Sunday. But I did get frustrated by the people who claimed to represent Christ, but were shaming and mocking others for not believing in Christ or for having a different take or whatever. And it would turn people off to Christianity as a whole and to Christ's message as a whole. And it used to bother me. And I use that as an analogy because it's like the people who are most effective at spreading Christ's message to the world are those who actually embody how Christ was as best as they possibly can, to where it naturally creates a situation where others are curious, like, what's different about this guy? Why is this guy so even keeled? Why is he able to move through things a little bit easier than other people? Why is he, despite going through very challenging circumstances, still hopeful and still able to find gratitude in his life? What's different about this guy? And I think the same can be said for waking up to the truth about big pharma, government, the Jesuits, the quote unquote, the Jews. It's the same thing. Are you actually embodying the paradigm you claim to represent to where you're making it more attractive for other people who aren't familiar with it?
Mm-hmm. Well, you are an ambassador for the truth once you have become aware of it. And now look, at the end of the day, I think I'll make it clear, I'm a Christian too, and I don't think you can have the truth without the truth, the way, and the life, which is Jesus Christ. And I think all conspiracy leads to that inevitable truth. And my own testimony and journey, I didn't start out a Christian, but my journey into learning about how the conspiracy works always pointed to him. And it always it led me to being born again in 2014 and give myself to Christ. And since then, the truth has just kept flowing. And my work and what I do, everything I do is to get people to realize that, who are also in the truth journey. Look, don't waste your time. The truth isn't in the New Age groups or the David Icke types over there. It's not Archons and Prison Planet stuff. It's nothing like that. It's not Nibiru returning, or if you're in that realm, or, it's not just all about banking and medical corruption and men doing evil things. And there's a spiritual element to this, and it's all because of what Jesus Christ did. That's why you have a conspiracy. And I want people to get to the chase. So again, but when you do wake up, a lot of people who get black pills, it's hopeless. It is a hopeless situation to find ourselves in. And I think, as you said, the people who are in control would like to keep us there. So I think there's a lot of controlled opposition within the truth movement that wants to keep people in that black-pilled, red-pilled, terrified hopelessness, spiraling into self-delusion, schizophrenic paranoia type conspiracy. You know, they want you to keep you there. They're happy as long as you stay there. But as soon as you become a truther who realizes, no, it's all about Jesus, then suddenly you're not a conspiracy theorist anymore. You're just a bog standard Christian. That's what you become, you know, and that is being a truther. I would say a real truther is actually to become a Christian at the end. And that does require this self-reflection, which makes you find that peace, that comfort, that understanding that no matter what happens in this life, I have that assurance that I'm going to make it to the kingdom at the end of all of this and be with my Heavenly Father, you know, through Jesus Christ and his sacrifice and what he's done for me. And as long as you stay sound and peaceable in that knowledge, no weapon formed against you will prosper, because, you know, like I said, they may be able to kill the flesh, but they'll never kill the spirit. And if, you know, the only one who can kill the spirit and the flesh is God. He's the only one you should fear. And once you fear God, who else? Who are you going to fear? What else is there left to fear? You know what I mean? So it's kind of, I think that self-reflection is really what we're aiming for, what we want to get people to. But I think there is also an element of people need to realize you've been living in the world for so long. You have some baggage. You have some scars. You have some things that habits you've picked up, which you aren't aware of yet, that are still killing you, that you need to drop and you need to leave. And also maybe you need to make a few apologies here and there to some people you've hurt along the way. It's that type of thing, you know, and I think until people do that self-reflection as well, I still think people will struggle even being aware of the truth to have that peace that we're talking about. And like I said, once you do get through it, I think there does become this sense of you and I representing what it means to know the truth. And you want people to look at you and go, what's he figured out? He seems to know something I don't. He seems to have it all together. He's cool. He's calm. He's collect. What is it? And then inevitably we give them the basic gospel, and we let the Holy Spirit do the work from there. So that's kind of what I do. And it seems like you understand that aspect as well. And a lot of people join my channel and think, this guy, you know, he must be a new age type, or he must be a Gnostic of some kind or something like this. And it's kind of, and they're just giving them the basic Christian gospel. And I feel we get confused. Like, where did this come from? You know, I did not expect to be hearing this, you know, necessarily. But I've been told, you know, the work on the Nephilim clowns, for example, which covers spiritual warfare primarily, and people encountering negative spiritual entities in their own life and how to deal with them. That has reached a lot of people, because I think nobody exists on this earth who has not encountered the spiritual in some way. There's just varying degrees of how much they're willing to admit it. Because some people are not in a position where they can openly admit that they've had a spiritual experience, because the people around them may ostracize them or cut them off or call them crazy, and they're too scared to admit it. But I'm there to say, whatever happens, this is your solution, Jesus, you know, and this is how you fight demons when they come knocking, which they will, you know, and you might not want to talk about it. You might deny it, but just call in the name of Jesus. I'm giving people the tools necessary, even if they don't want to admit that they're going to need to use them, you know. And again, I get messages telling me this has brought them closer to Christ, but also just talking simply about what Jesus promised he was going to do to the people he was around at this time, and also how there's evidence that he did fulfill those promises in that time. And when you contextualize human history into the little season lens and conspiracy theory into the little season lens, everything just kind of click into place very quickly. And I found talking about that has brought multitudes to Jesus, from atheist to new age, because it finally makes him no longer this, I've just nipped out for a pack of cigarettes 2,000 years later, he still hasn't come back type of God. You know what I mean? It makes him a real, no, he fulfilled the promises to those people. He raised a kingdom on the earth, and those people reigned as saints and kings and rulers. And we're in this time where Satan's let loose and all the nations are being deceived, and right around the corner is the final judgment. So that really gives people actually a lot more faith and hope, I find, than the common dispensationalist futurist doctrine that implies we all got to go through some horrible suffering, and if you're lucky, you might get chosen. You know what I mean? Like, when you actually get down to brass tacks, I think people trust more in the Jesus that kept the promises to the people in his time, that he would return in their lifetime and in their generation. And then I think that makes them find that peace. But it's kind of like, well, he promised, he's still here for us. He never lied. As long as we believe in him, we're saved. You know, his work is done. And I think people can believe that more if they know that he it hasn't been 2,000 years since he made that promise. It was all fulfilled. And I find that seems to be touching people in a big way, which is incredible to see. And I'm happy I did some small work in helping people think about that concept. But again, it hasn't come without its issues. It really hasn't come without its issues, and I find myself as just a YouTube channel talking about conspiracies in a very strange place. Talking about also these topics as a Christian and I empathize with the people coming to Christ through these topics because I too came to Christ through obscure means. I wasn't raised in a church, and I find it's these obscure topics that are bringing people to him in this day. The church isn't enough anymore. And look, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to throw shade at church or what style of church you want to do. I think it has its place for fellowship and that, as a wonderful thing. Don't get me wrong. But I think there's this whole generation of people today who the church is not enough. It's not. And people don't want to hear that. Some people say it's blasphemous to even say that, but it's not. Like it isn't working for them. It's broken. The systems are broken. They're far removed from what the ecclesias that were originally around in the first century. It's not what it was. It's been corrupted. Most people, when they look at the church today, think of the Catholic pedophiles, raping little boys, and that's as blunt as it goes, and they don't go any further. How do you come back from an image like that? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Or the mega churches that have multiple campuses.
The prosperity types. Yeah.
Yeah. That are clearly, not in alignment with Christ's true message, that went along with the woke nonsense, or, might be laundering money in some cases, some just pretty wild stuff that is fundamentally immoral. For me, I'll just share a quick piece of my journey. I grew up in an evangelical church after my dad got back from rehab when I was 14. We started going to church a lot more. I'd called myself a Christian from age roughly 14 through 22. And then started venturing into a lot of new agey stuff from 22 till I would say really a couple years ago actually, and then have slowly started coming back to Christ. But I don't know where I land. There's a number of things, a number of questions that I still have. I do believe wholeheartedly that Christ was a real figure, first off. Second, that he was unique in the sense that he was, at the very least, the best representation of God on earth, if not quite literally God in the flesh on earth. And I don't know where I stand on that. And then I also don't know where I stand on Paul's doctrine, not you being you, Paul, but you know who I'm talking about, Paul of the Bible. I don't know where I stand on whether Paul was an apostle that was illegitimate, that corrupted much of the New Testament in the way that it was formed. And I'm still dancing with that idea. And then there's some questions around hell and its, translation being Gehenna in its original context, which was a place that Israelites threw out their trash and things like this. And then there's some questions that I have around all that. But nonetheless, I think represent a larger group of people who dipped into the new age and are like, there's some good stuff here, but this is also rife with so much deception, so much self-centered deception that leads someone to a hedonistic sort of lifestyle, or can lead someone to a hedonistic lifestyle. But there's some good stuff, and then are slowly coming back to Christ. And I will say that what has made me entertain Christianity, and Christianity has lost all meaning, that word, but have entertained coming back to Christ even more, is the idea of the millennial reign and being in the midst of Satan's little season, because it just all checks out, like you said, when you put all those pieces together. So as a starting point, if we could we contrast what most modern Christians believe with respect to the chronology, the book of Revelation, what Jesus said, and, there are some specific verses that we could bring up, like Matthew 16:28, Mark 9:1, Luke 9:27, Matthew 10:23, Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, chapter 1, verse 3, 22:6, and then 22:10. There's several things that Jesus said, if taken literally, point to the idea that he already returned in roughly, correct me if I'm wrong in this, around 60 to 80 AD.
Roughly, give or take. Yeah.
Roughly. Right. Okay. So could we contrast like what most modern Christians believe and then the idea that we've been dancing around?
Yeah. Well, what's taught in seminary and what you have to teach if you want to be a pastor or a preacher or a deacon or whatever it is in any mainstream, mainline church of a government, like the Church of England, for example, this is what you have to teach, or if you want to be in a Catholic church anywhere, you have to teach a specific line that we are still waiting for Christ to return after Pentecost. Okay. And that's it. That's basically it. That's the summary of it all. So what we're waiting for are the signs of the times. Okay. We're waiting for tribulation to come. We're waiting for the abomination of desolation. We're waiting for the mark of the beast, and we're basically still waiting on things to happen that were said to have supposed to have happened a long time ago. But most Christians today don't know that these things were supposed to happen quite soon. So we'll get into that in a minute, but most Christians today are waiting for Jesus to return so he can basically lock up Satan for 1,000 years and establish a kingdom, a millennial reign it's called. And that will come after a tribulation period. People say 7 years or 2 halves of 3.5 years. There's lots of, again, there's interpretation galore when it comes to how this is all going to go down. Is there going to be a rapture? Is it going to be pre or post tribulation? And then there's thousands of and I mean that, like 43,000 denominations of Christians arguing over these minutiae details of how will Jesus return exactly, and where do we stand as the church today. And a lot of people consider themselves like the church of Laodicea, I think it's pronounced, like we're the ones who have fallen away. And I think people have made these metaphorical comparisons to the 7 churches that existed in those times, in the times of Paul, let's say. And it's all supposed to be metaphorical. And a lot of the word has kind of fallen into that idea of it's allegory here, but it's literal there. And we have to make these distinctions. And there's only the way to rightly divide the word, as these pastors like to say in like evangelical, and they all have this rightly divided word that we're waiting for Jesus Christ to return. So who can argue with the officials on the matter? That they're the pastor. They're the ones who I trust they've done the research, But when you read the book, you actually start listening to the read words of Jesus. And you quoted a huge list there. And there are so many verses. And I have my own little document where I've got to map them out. And I've said them all on my channel numerous times, and I've laid it out. I've done hundreds of, a dozen at least presentations and other channels where I've laid it all out. Again, as I explained, I'm not here to do a full breakdown for you today, but there's a lot of work to be done if you want to go and do it. What we're saying is, in contrast to what the mainline Christians believe, and that's even Catholic to Orthodox to Protestant to it doesn't matter where you come from. The mainline is
Baptist, Lutheran, literally like all of modern Christianity.
They all agree today we're waiting for Jesus to return. Some minor churches may say, well, we're living in the millennial reign eternally right now. It's like a metaphor, you know what I mean? Like, and that's how some small churches kind of believe that, but they're like a very minute minority. The main line that's amillennialism, by the way. It's like a metaphorical eternity. We're always in the millennial reign now that Christ has ascended to heaven. It's that type of thing. A lot of people believe that.
That feels super abstract and not grounded in anything practical. Yeah.
It is so abstract. It is. But you can thank I think a lot of Calvinist thinkers kind of go a lot down that line as well, And I think a lot of it just comes from, as secularism has taken root in civilization today, I think a lot of Christians and a lot of churches are now going more down the route of it is more symbolic than literal. We weren't supposed to take any of these things literally, it is more about the eternal refrain of the psyche of man. And these were symbols for how mankind deals with situations. And Jordan Peterson is a good example of this. Like, he gave these presentations trying to understand the early books of the Bible, and it's kind of like, wrestling with God. He didn't really wrestle with the angel. It was just a metaphor for what man has to do with dealing with God on a daily basis. It's kind of these, everything's a metaphor. Everything's a psychological comparison or a simile of some kind, and that's how we should be interpreting the Bible. And that's a popular way of doing it today, because I think people are getting less spiritual in nature, and they feel ashamed because of secularist scientism, scientific research saying, oh, well, obviously there's no God. So how are you going to explain all of this? And you get apologetics suddenly arising up, and it's kind of like, we've got nothing to apologize for. boldly proclaim the truth that is in that book as is, and don't worry about what man has to say, you know. But I think a lot of Christians have concerned themselves with the opinions of man rather than the opinions of God. So we've got a weird blend of Christianity today. But what we're talking about today slaps it all back into focus. It makes the word true 100%. Christ meant what he said. Again, for example, you know, when he said to the people, this generation will not pass away till they see these things come. You know, until they see the glory of my kingdom coming in the clouds. You, Caiaphas, will see me return in the clouds with my kingdom. Like, you know, it's kind of, he makes it very clear. It's like, none of you will pass away standing before me before you see me return with my kingdom. And people argue, well, he was talking about the transfiguration, which happened just a few pages afterwards. You know what I mean? So it's kind of, you know, that's what he was talking about. People would see him just quickly give a glimpse of his glorious self before going back. It's kind of, okay, so how many people died before that? Because he said some here won't die. Okay. It's like you have to understand there's a lot of mental gymnastics that have to take place to try and make sense of that 2,000-year gap we're currently supposedly in. Where is he?
Yeah. And if you look at, like, for example, what you were just referring to, Matthew 24:34, he says, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. And that's immediately after he lists the destruction of the temple, wars, tribulations, cosmic signs, the Son of Man coming in the clouds, and gathering of the elect.
Yep.
Like right after he says all that, he says that truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until these things come to pass.
But he didn't mean the generation of people he's talking to right there in front of him. Thankfully for them, he was talking through them, so the words would get written down. So us, 2,000 years later, with our iPads and our computers and our comfy desk chairs, could go, oh, he was talking about me. You know, when you really have to think about it, it's ridiculous and narcissistic to think that that's what it actually means. But that's the delusion we're currently under. And you have to wonder, how can it be so bad? If we've got it so wrong, how is that possible? And when you look, well, read ahead. Let's go to Revelation 20, verse 7. You know, once the millennial reign has ended, Satan's let loose for a season. So you can argue how long that is. I don't care. How long's a piece of string? Who knows? You know, who knows how long a season is? But there's a period of time where he deceives all the nations. And deceives means deceives. Okay. And what would the ultimate deception be? People not realizing that Christ has already come and gone would be a pretty big deception. And it's possible we could be those people living in that specific time where we've been completely lied to about when we are and who we are. And even possibly where we are. And the shape of the earth can get into this. You know, everything can get involved now. The whole thing's up in the air. We're living in a time of complete and total deception. It's the only way to describe the world we live in right now. As a truther, as a conspiracy theorist, we know this. We've done the research. We've seen how far the lies go. And this is why this theory really contextualizes conspiracy so well. It's like, that's how it's so bad. That's why we have a conspiracy. That's why we even have Freemasons. That's why we have secret societies. It's why the whole thing exists at all. It's why there is such stringent control of history in both the schools and the seminaries, from what we've discovered. You know, it's because they're burying and hiding that Christ was here for 1,000 years on the earth already and reigned with his immortal, glorious saints over people who weren't perfect and glorious, but still lived a hell of a long time in that wonderful time, you know, and they built beautiful things, incredibly impossible to build today things, you know, but even with our tools and our wonderful machinery and time organizational skills, we do not build like they do. We do not do it because these were an inspired people who were not building for functionality. They were building for meaning, for purpose, for beauty, for the glory of God himself. And that's why the past looks so different than the cubes we make today. It's because they had a good reason. Jesus was coming to visit their region of the earth soon. We better make this place look good. You know, it's probably something like that. We can only imagine because it's been buried. It's been hidden. And it seems like when Satan was released, there was a cataclysm of some kind and there was a complete takeover and control. There was a power vacuum left behind of some kind because it seems like Christ and his saints receded back to the camp of saints, wherever that is. We've talked about this. We've speculated for hours. We've looked into the research on my channel and other channels, and there's plenty of evidence to show right now. I think we made a damn good case. This is what happened, And when that vacuum was left behind, some people didn't go with him. It's simple. They didn't go. They didn't make those pilgrimages to wherever that place was. And were the remnants of what was left behind during this little season, or at least the offspring of, or the children's grandchildren of now, but what was left behind, and this is a promise that was always made to us, his word. And we are still able to find Jesus today, but without seeing. It's easy to believe in Jesus when he's right there. For 1,000 years, if anything, blessed are we because we believe even without seeing. And that's biblical, that is what was said. Maybe it was meant for people like us, that message, that time, because we are in a time of deception. Even in this time, Satan cannot stop us from discovering and finding Jesus Christ. Not even just through the books, which have probably been manipulated in this time. Let's admit it. And how many versions of the Bible exist today? We know it's been edited and messed with, but still the Holy Spirit comes to us. Jesus comes to us himself. He doesn't need words on paper. He is the King. He is in all glory. He has defeated death. He has conquered death. He can come to us if he wants to come to us, and he does, and he reveals himself to people in many ways, not simply just through the word of God, which we think is a book. Jesus Christ is the word of God, and he is supernatural. I believe in a supernatural God, a supernatural king. I don't think it has to be so, well, the book says this. Yeah, well, Christ came to me and said this. So I think we can have that. We can have that in this world because I don't think he's left us behind. Do you get what I mean? I don't think we're responsible for our father's sins.
I totally get what you mean. Yeah.
In that respect anymore. We're not living under that law anymore, that generational curse of the law, I think he comes for his children, and I think it's that simple. I think there is a wheat and tear situation still going on. I think for example, the secret societies, their job was to bury and take control of the buildings that were laying around everywhere. Because Freemasons literally claim to have built it all. But you look at the stories of when these things were built, they were all built in 6 months at the same time by the same select group of architects spread out through hundreds of miles. It's kind of like a project like that, an undertaking like this to build this palace with 1,000 rooms would not take 6 months in the time where horse and cars were pulling around everything. It's kind of, what do you take us for?
Most healthcare today operates on an outdated mechanistic model, treating the body like a battlefield rather than a self-healing system. You wait months for an appointment only to receive a rush diagnosis that labels you rather than truly understanding your unique health. Even in holistic health, many practitioners rely on endless lab tests and supplement protocols addressing symptoms instead of the root cause. And the result, another prescription or supplement regimen that merely suppresses or masks symptoms rather than facilitating true healing, whether the imbalance was physical, emotional, energetic, or a mix of all three. And that's why Dr. Tom Cowan co-founded the New Biology Clinic, to offer something radically different. As one of the most respected natural health doctors in the world, Dr. Cowan has spent decades challenging conventional medicine and advancing a deeper understanding of human biology, water, and natural health. His work isn't just about rejecting the mainstream, it's about offering a more truthful, biologically coherent approach for healing. The New Biology Clinic recognizes that health isn't about fighting disease, it's about restoring balance. You're not a diagnosis, you're an individual with a unique story, and healing should honor that. With virtual consultations available worldwide, the clinic offers a flat-rate monthly membership that gives you direct access to practitioners who take the time to actually listen. Members also get exclusive health live streams, a resource library, and live sessions covering everything from biofield tuning and breathwork to movement and meditation, all designed to support whole body healing. And if you're not ready for a membership, you can book a one-time appointment, sign up for an enrichment-only membership for the healing modalities alone, or schedule a free connection session with one of the care team members to see how the New Biology Clinic can help in your specific situation. This isn't about keeping you dependent on doctors. It's about making you sovereign over your health. Head to newbiologyclinic.com and use code THEWAYFORWARD, and that's spelled The Way, F-O-R-W-A-R-D, for $50 off account activation, or just head to the show notes for more info. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com for $150 off. Your body already knows how to heal, and New Biology Clinic helps you remember. Can I share one example?
Oh, yeah.
So, for example, the Minnesota State Capitol was alleged to have been built over a 9-year period between 1895 and 1904, I believe, with no modern equipment. They have the second largest marble dome, marble self-supporting dome in the entire world that was allegedly built with people who are using hammers and chisels, carrying these massive pieces of marble and other stones across thousands of miles in some cases, with no modern architecture, done in as little as 8 years. And if you look at that building, literally just look at the building, you come to the conclusion, if you're critically thinking, that there is absolutely no chance. The dome itself is self-supporting, which is an absolute engineering nightmare without advanced tools. And the idea that it was built by guys who were not trained in the mathematical modeling of traditional civil and mechanical engineering and were using primitive tools, relatively speaking, is absolutely absurd. And there's so many other anomalies with just this building, and there's so many other examples just like it. I mean, another example is the Texas State Capitol, which is just 30 miles down the road from me right now. There's absolutely zero chance when you look at that building that you can actually believe that narrative regarding how it was built. And there's
the funny thing, I think that Joe from JT Follows JC always says that he follows a lot of these buildings. You're talking about state capitals in America. And one thing that he always brings up, which is funny, he points out that, look, this is supposed to be post-war, kicking the British out of America, no government peoples taking control of everything. And what's the first thing these people do? They build government capital buildings that are like monolithic, like Pantheon, like Parthenons. It's kind of, who would do that? And it's kind of, well, why would these people have the mindset? It's because they didn't build them. They were just there. They're laying around, and the Freemasons saw the Freemasonry just laying around and laid claim to it and founded it. You know, they found it. They're telling you, you know, and they've come up, and they've been writing the narrative ever since. They've been telling us where these things came from. Oh, we built them. You know, aren't we such wonderful, you know, people of the community who have donated our time and money and our efforts into building these beautiful things for your city and village. But, you know, a lot of Americans talk about their capitals. Again, they shouldn't be there. They don't fit. It's like Greco-Roman architecture in the middle of America. It makes zero sense, really. But then you don't understand what it's like in Europe. Like Paris alone is your state capital building just copy and pasted 1,000 times in one small space. Okay. I've been to Paris. You can only look at it and go, who built this? But the thing is, no one is. Everyone's living in it, blind to what's right there in front of them. And I was for a long time too, because you're so wrapped up in yourself and your phone and head down and your problems and your worries to stop for a second and just look around and think about what you're looking at. And it's kind of like, why would I question it? The history is known. It's in the books. It's fine. We know who built those. Someone knows anyway. So why do I have to know? It's like everyone doesn't care. They don't care, you know. And this topic, this research, this theory really makes people suddenly care. And the Tartarian stuff kind of has it. They kind of get the point. Some civilization well advanced than we are today built all this stuff and then just disappeared. We don't understand. Like, we'll call it Tartarians, you know, but when the only bit, well, and that's a problem for Christians, by the way, because the Tartarian researchers are right. That did happen. The evidence is all around us. How do we as Christians explain this? Well, we have an explanation. Christ said he would reign on earth and establish a kingdom that lasted 1,000 years. Well, men unencumbered by Satan, who's now locked away for 1,000 years, with the joy and glory of knowing God is real and the peace that comes with that and the bounty that comes with no more usury, none of that horrible stuff that keeps us down and weak and miserable, perfect health through the cathedrals everywhere, which are clearly like healing centers of geometric perfection and sound and frequency with the organ sounds that people living extended lives, being able to learn the skills necessary and put the passion back into creativity because they don't have to worry about anything else. What else is there to do? Then you get the old world. And the Bible explains that. There's 1,000 years where Christ is here. And people get to do that kind of stuff. So that's where it comes from. The Bible explains it is there. And we as Christians need an answer. So I find a lot of the Tartarian types are coming to Christ because of this truth, this reality, this situation. And I think this theory, I don't think it's a theory. We call it the little season theory, you know. I think it brings the Bible to life. And I think it brings the the Bible to reality. I think it doesn't become an abstract anymore, or a concept or a metaphor. It becomes a tangible, real thing that had a real world impact. It's a history book that tells you exactly where we come from, who made us, what the journey was to get us where we are today. And it tells you exactly who we are and what time we're living in. And we've just been lied to in this time. We've been lied to. And apparently, oh, no, we're living just before tribulation. But we're waiting about 2,000 years before it happens. Which again is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. You know, that is going to be the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And if we want to call ourselves Christians, we need to believe what Jesus said. Realistic. That's what we are. We're followers of Christ. Okay. Again, Christians are weighted word today. A lot of baggage comes with that claim. I say we're just followers of the words of Jesus. And he told us he was coming back in that time. I believe him. That's all I need. And thankfully, it isn't just faith-based, because now in this day, we can look, thanks to the internet, at the world around us and work together to bring together this body of evidence that proves, no, he really did keep his word, and he really was here, and he really did do all this. It's real. It's real. You don't need faith. You can know, and that's a wonderful thing to give to people. And the people then argue, oh, where's our blessed hope? It's like, this is what people get upset about. It's kind of like, you've stolen from me the hope that when Jesus returns, I get to be taken away from this horrible world and just go straight to heaven because I'm saved, you know, and I'm waiting for it. So I'm not going to do anything to fix the problems in the world because I'm just waiting for Jesus to return. That's those type of people, you know, but they think I'm stealing something.
There's so many of them too. Like so many Christian truthers who adopt the mainstream Christian worldview I literally see it in my comment section on a lot of my posts, right? Where people will say, well, it doesn't matter. This is all going to shit. Jesus is coming back soon anyway.
No, I don't believe that. I think this is why
Exactly. I
think the little season hasn't been given a time for a reason. I think because while this is happening, we can live in the kingdom now. Like, Satan is a defeated enemy. Okay. Like, we can walk in Christ right here and manifest the kingdom on earth through us right now. Like, we can just do that. And as the body of Christ, we can manifest it on earth easily. Okay. I think God does do that as well. I think there's plenty of precedents there that God gives humanity the chance to avoid judgment and delay judgment in so much as they repent and turn and go back to him. Okay. And we can still do that. So I think these Christians who are in the idea, well, what can I do? I just need to wait for Jesus to return. It's like, that's not what Jesus said. Okay. Do greater things than I is what he said. Okay. We can do that. We can build heaven on earth. And people did. The 1,000-year reign, the example we have of the past, is an example of people who did just that. You don't have to say angels built it. Humans at their best did that. We can do that too. Everything we make can be to his glory. And as long as we're not making for ourselves anymore and everything's made for him, with him in mind, the world will manifest, heaven will manifest. It's simple. Through us, through the body of Christ. So I'm not one of those passive Christians. It's like, don't sit back and do nothing. But
oh no, I wasn't saying you were. I'm saying that's what a lot of modern Christian truthers who are aware of what's going on in the world, that's where they land. That this is inevitable and Christ is returning soon.
This theory can bring people to more of an active Christianity again, I think, because of the idea that, well, you know, what am I going to do during this little season? Just wait for judgment? No, there's a fight here. You know, it's the true battle for good and evil. It's that black and white, and people don't like black and white thinking in this world, you know. But I think there's God, there's good, and then there's everything that strays from that. I think the devil's doing everything he can to make us stray as far away from God as possible to get his army. And maybe there is a separation happening here, a wheat and the tares situation. But I think we can postpone that judgment for as long as we repent and turn to him and go towards him. And the devil's just having his time to do what he can. Now, the Bible does say it will be a short season. So maybe I'm being too hopeful for the collective mankind, and maybe we're not that great. We're not going to make it that long. I don't know. I'm open to some mystery in this situation. But I know while I'm here and aware and proclaiming to follow Christ, I better do what I can in this time to help the people who need the help and get more people to him before that judgment day comes. So the Great Commission never really ended, whether it's 2,000 years ago or it's now. And again, we haven't even got into the idea that, well, it hasn't even been 2,000 years. It's been like 1,000 300 years.
That's what I was going to ask you next is the timeline.
Yeah, it's been like 1,300 years since Christ, since his resurrection, and then a time period, maybe a generation, and then suddenly, bam, he comes back, tribulation, judgment, everything, establishes a millennial reign. Okay. That happened maybe, like you said, around 60 to 70, 80 AD. So something like this around that time. And what they've done is they've added time to our history that just doesn't exist, just stretch it out. They've called the worst year on record 536 AD, when it was more likely 60 AD. You know what I mean? It was more likely that time, but they've said it was this 500 years later situation, where if you listen to the description of that time, it seems like tribulation to me. It's a perfect description of tribulation,
Can we talk about that from like a historical context too? Because from my understanding, there is an account from Josephus where he talks about seeing something at that time around 60 to 70 AD that would lend credence to this idea that Christ already returned at that time. And then there was a massive event where the entire world stood still and the entire world recognized this. Topher Gardner and I talked about this when I interviewed him, that it makes sense of how all of Earth adopted Jesus to start time, like to start the counting of time when we didn't have modern technology at the time. Something earth-shattering had to have occurred in order to get virtually all of the nations across the earth to recognize, oh, time starts now. This is when we're going to count time, because this was absolutely nuts.
A reset at its finest. Like everything that came before, irrelevant. Life starts now. That's literally what it seems like. And yeah, he sadly passed away. I'm sure you've heard of him, Gunnar Heinsohn. I think Topher probably mentioned him. And he's a man of many talents, but he got into chronology randomly. I don't know why. I think he was like an economist originally. I don't know what got him into it, but I think he's just a man who likes to do a lot of research. But he did this great presentation and proved basically, unequivocally, 700 years doesn't exist. They just added it in. And a lot of events that they talked about through antiquity, middle antiquity, late antiquity were actually all at the same time. They're not spread out over 900 years or 700 years. It's all in the same time period. And he does it through strata layering, archaeological layering of stratum, and you can't make that up. You can't lie. And it says there's nothing under Rome. There's nothing underneath it. Like, it doesn't matter how far they go down. And Rome is buried. How is so much of this civilization under the ground? Doesn't make any sense. Like, there's nothing under it. There's nothing under it. And he says like 4,000 dig sites, nothing. And it's like, what buried all this? And he goes through it and he says something happened in what we call the ninth century, but really it was the first century. So there is no ninth or first century. Don't think about it like that. There's just the event that happened in the beginning, and it seems like this is his prediction. Something wiped out about 98% of the population. Something happened. And my research in the work of others as well, I think he might have mentioned this, it was volcanoes. They all went off at once by fire, tribulation by fire. We're talking not by water. We were promised the next one will be by fire. And then this is where you get things like Pompeii, the ultimate example, of like, is it Vesuvius? Was that the name of the Pompeii volcano erupting? And that's like the first time we have any historical record of a volcano erupting. Written record.
Have you ever looked at Mike Wilkerson's work, Stellium 7 on YouTube?
Yeah, I know Mike quite well, yeah.
Okay, yeah, Mike's a homie of mine too. And so when I interviewed him on his heartstones and the idea of rapid petrification, my mind immediately went to this. Because it could have been like volcanoes going off. Also, it could have been some sort of plasma-based phenomenon that covered the entire Earth.
I could believe that too, yeah.
Induced rapid petrification, which is why Mike Stone's a virology guy. Mike Wilkerson is finding heartstones all over the place, and other people are as well, that have like all the features of a heart that has gone through a petrification process, which is
all
wild.
the holes in the right place for the ventricles, the crease down the side, and unravel them and everything.
Yeah.
And he's done the whole presentation on my channel. It's amazing. Honestly, I've seen it all.
Yeah. Is that where your mind went when he said this? Like, oh my gosh, this kind of might lend credence to this idea.
It could be. And I think plasma is a good way to describe. I think it was a bit of everything. I think everything happened at once. I don't think it was it's like, imagine we are a snow globe. It just went, like, that's it. And everything just went, all the earth burst open, tsunamis, floods, every volcano just cracks out in the ocean too. This is why the ocean is now salt as well, because the volcanoes under the water erupted. All the minerals came out and made the water unable to be drunk anymore. It just literally destroyed everything. And I think that much energy would cause plasma bursts and emissions. The whole sky was blacked out. The sun was gone because there's ash everywhere. It was just a mat, and that causes energy. That probably caused plasma lightning coming down from ash clouds. Could you imagine just the horror, and the survival rate of that is minimal, next to nothing. And that seems to be exactly what history tells us happened, and it's unprecedented. You couldn't imagine anything like this, but then you have to ask yourself, people say the mud flood is what buried all these Tartarian buildings. That's what people always say, the mud flood, the mud flood, the mud flood. It's like, there was no mud flood. Like, that's not what happened. Ash came down in rain and buried everything.
But okay, so here's my question though. Do you think some of these, it's ubiquitous across the earth, these buried pieces of architecture that are sort of this like Greco-Roman Byzantine style architecture across the earth that has been buried, is that the remnants of the 1,000-year Christ's millennial reign that happened from roughly 60 to 70 AD onward? Or is that the civilization prior to Christ's return in 60 to 70 AD?
It's Rome. It's Babylon. It's the system. It's the beast that the harlot was riding, that the Jews were using to their advantage. It's the beast system. It's Rome, the empire that went over the whole earth and subjugated everybody. You know what I mean? All roads lead to Rome.
Okay, so it's not Christ's millennial reign. No. It's the civilization before that. Okay.
I think there's a distinction here that we have, as new chronologists, are kind of making here, what we've kind of observed. So there was Rome, an empire everywhere. This is the pillared, columned civilization. Even Byzantine has been linked with them in many ways. But I think when everything got buried, everything didn't get buried to varying degrees of waves and forms. When the rains came down, were things buried. Some things got buried by a few feet. Some things got buried by well above meters above them, It's because that's just how things would happen when the ash came down. It's not uniform in any way. So I think some buildings would have remained, which would have got repurposed afterwards. Why waste them? The shelter, I'm going to use it, But now we're in Christ's domain. Now we're in a new world. Remember what happened after the cataclysm? Those who died in Christ were resurrected. So they get to live for 1,000 years with him now on a new earth, kind of a terraformed earth, where they can rebuild in their image.
So then timeline wise, we're talking roughly 60 to 70 AD through 1,070 AD.
Something like that. Let's say that. Yeah, 1,070. That's the millennial reign period. Sure. Let's just say that.
And then there's that 700-year period that doesn't actually exist, that we've been told exists. So it puts us in roughly the year 1370-ish.
1776. So let's just say tribulation happened in 76 AD. 1,000 years is 1,076 AD. Satan gets released. Okay. And now we're living in that time period afterwards. Okay. We're Satan's released. So for us, if we say 1776, Independence Day is the day he was released. So that's 700 years added on to 1076, isn't it? 1776. Okay, so let's say that's the case. But this is theory, by the way. This is spitballing. I don't know this is fact, but just to give you like an idea to play with, so you can kind of speculate yourself and do your own research on the idea. There's room here,
Okay, can I clarify that real quick? Sorry to interrupt. I just want to clarify it real quick, just so I'm making sense of it. So we're speculating possibly 76 AD is when that massive cataclysm happened, that Christ returned, and then those who died in Christ were resurrected to live with him in his 1,000-year millennial reign, which would have put it between 76 AD to 1076 AD. And then there's a 700-year period that was just put into history that never actually existed, that would put 1776-ish as the time after the 1,000-year millennial reign, if we're looking back to the book of Revelation, when the deceiver gets let loose to rule over the masses for a little season. So we're in the midst of the little season right now. And it's really that 1776 was actually roughly 1076.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly that. So, and that would make sense, because obviously that time period is when the Illuminati was actually created in Bavaria. So it's actually, it does line up quite scarily well, which means we have been here for what, maybe 250 years, 249 years since that event, roughly now. Okay. So people argue we're at the end of a little season because of this, because we're almost hitting 250 years. And if you take Christ's millennial reign and play the seasons game, divide it by 4, then that's 3 sets of 250. So Christ gets 1,000, Satan gets a season, which is a quarter of that. So maybe people think we're at the end of the reign of the little season because of that, and we're about to do Great White Throne Judgment and the Gog-Magog War. I don't know, though. I'm of the camp of we actually don't know how long it is. We can arbitrarily say a season is 250 years, but we don't know that. It could be, I don't know, what's a quarter of 6,000 or 7,000 years? The whole creation. You know what I mean? Like, we don't know how long a season actually is in that respect. Some people say it's only like 3 months. So if that's the case, then who knows what's going on, you know? But I think there is precedence to say we can pretty much trace most of our family histories quite safely to like the 1700s. After that, you're getting into the realms of you making stuff up. Okay, you're just guessing now. Right? You really are, because we don't have that. The records are not as strong as you think they are. They're really not. People like to tell you they are, like through ancestry.com, and then they're not. These amateur ancestry people who say, well, my family tree goes all the way back to England to the 10th century. And it's like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. You've been lied to. You have been lied to. That is not the case. Like, because the records actually aren't that strong. They don't go that. And I've seen how ancestry works. It's guesswork. The guessing. This may have been your grandmother or grandfather. We don't really know. We have some ideas of who it could be, you know?
Hey, y'all. I'm here with Melissa Kupsch from Remedy Academy of Homeopathy. We are so stoked here at The Way Forward to be partnering with Melissa and Remedy in order to spread the message of homeopathy across the world, and also to partner on the eventual development of healing centers across the United States.
People are pretty quickly coming to realize that frequency is the future of medicine. We are witnessing the great resurgence of homeopathy right now. We're really moving away from that suppressive medical model, whether it's for eczema, asthma, hormones, fertility, anxiety, depression, trauma, whatever it is, it all starts as energy in the person's field first. If we change our field, we can completely change our life. Our 2-year academy is open worldwide to anyone who wants to become a homeopath. We've got 5 lecturers and we currently have over 500 students enrolled, which is record numbers in our field. A career in homeopathy is amazing for anyone who wants flexibility in their work and who wants to be valuable in creating this new world. We have stay-at-home parents enrolled. We have ex-medical professionals, grandparents signed up who want to learn how to heal their grandchildren and pass on that invaluable knowledge. We even have husband and wife teams. So my husband enrolled in the course with no prior knowledge of health as a background, and he is loving it.
Kylie is also enrolled as well. So my partner is, and she's so stoked to become a homeopath and to be helping to spread this message across the world.
The thing that we hear from so many of our students is, I found my thing. Homeopathy is the key. We harness frequencies from nature and we alter the field of all creations. So if anybody wants to join us or they want to know more about it, they can visit our website.
Yeah, and all that information will be in the show notes. So if you want to learn more about Remedy Academy, also Remedy Collective, also some of the homeopathic products that they have, please just head to the show notes. All of that will be listed there. You know, what's interesting talking about Tartary, and this might still be in line with living in the midst of the little season and post-Christ 1,000-year millennial reign, is that 2 of my 8 great-grandparents, at the least, I know 2 of them, were orphans. And I've talked to several other people, and it seems to be pretty common that either their grandparents, great-grandparents, or great-great-grandparents if they trace them back, were orphans in some cases.
Yeah, it's really common. It is. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, you're good. And what I'm getting at, though, is I've thought possibly because insane asylums were prevalent in the 1800s and 1900s, we had the World's Fairs, which I believe were ways to obfuscate that much of this architecture was already there, and they came up with the nonsensical narrative that they built these plaster paper mache structures temporarily in the Chicago World Fair, Buffalo, St. Louis Exposition, just as a display of different architectural styles across the earth. But I think that those were ways to obfuscate that those were actual permanent structures that were already there, that were found, just as you said, by the Freemasons and other secret societies, and who shifted the narrative. And the insane asylums were intended to take people who would have been like you and I, like, hey, no, this is BS. They're lying about these buildings. They didn't build these buildings. This is the remnants of Christ's millennial reign, and just shoved them into insane asylums and took their kids away from them, made those kids orphans. And that's total speculation. I could 1000% be wrong, but I could see that being the case, at least partially, with respect to this whole notion.
I think so. I mean, we have looked into records of the insane asylums, and predominantly religious fanaticism was one of the reasons why people were locked up. And they call them lunatics as well, which is actually linked to insanity for the phases of the moon. Okay. The lunar cycle. And I think they would have had a lunar calendar, the millennial reign people. I think that would have been the case, the true calendar, based on the cycles of the moon rather than the heliocentric calendar, So I think things would have been a lot, and I think there's precedent to say, yeah, many of the people who still remembered the reign, or were not willing to go along with the new paradigm, or were questioning what their children were being taught in the new schools, is like, that's not true history. Who's telling you this? No, lock him away. Crazy old dad's going on about something that doesn't make any sense anymore. That's, it's that type of thing. I think a lot of that did happen. I think a lot of people were locked up, and it caused a lot of orphans to exist who were re-educated in these Freemason Oddfellow run camps, basically, re-education camps. And then a whole new generation went into the world, memories wiped of the time that was before. Just isn't in the books. So in the textbooks I was taught, so it doesn't exist anymore. And it didn't take long to erase it. It didn't. It just lock away the ones who were talking about it and re-educate the ones that are left. And I think that's what happened. I think that is exactly, I think they've had control of the schools ever since, and have been educating us in what the truth is ever since, and now it's time that people, and all they can do is keep us distracted. That's why they own the media, everything. Medicine, media, education, banking systems, name a system, they own it. And everything they do is to distract us. Because all we have to do is look up, and they've lost us. Just like, whoa, where the hell did that building come from? So they need to keep us down as much as possible, thinking about our own problems and not looking at screens for as long as possible, or distracted by as long as possible, worried about famine or pestilence or disease or war as much as possible. So we don't have time to stop and think. And that's all they can do. They're scared. That's why entertainment is such a powerful tool to them. That's one of their main weapons. Distraction from what? That Christ was here. We can't hide it. They're struggling massively to suppress and hide it because the evidence is overwhelming, because he built a massive kingdom over a 1,000-year period that can't be destroyed easily. It takes, it's too much stuff. They had a good, like I said, these World's Fairs. It gives them an excuse to destroy the buildings afterwards. No, it was temporary, but there's too much. There's too much. It's too built out. It's the aqueducts as well. The canals we have everywhere, which is just impossible. Like the whole infrastructure of the earth as we know it today, we are squatting in the remains of that kingdom. Everything. No matter how many wars they've had, where they carpet bomb cities in like World War I, World War II, you know what I mean? Whatever war you want to call it, where entire beautiful cities have just been wiped off the face of the map, no longer exist as they used to anymore, especially in Europe after what the wars did to us, devastated some places. There's still beautiful buildings standing. They could not get it all. Impossible. Too much everywhere. Okay. So all they can do is lie about who built it. Distract your attention away from it, saying that's old, boring, stuffy building stuff. That's not interesting. That's old. Make history in the textbooks as dry as possible, So no one wants to bother. Make it so if you read a history textbook, you fall asleep after the first 3 lines because the book's like this thick. And even just thinking about reading it will make you fall asleep. You know what I mean? Like, that's how they do it. Like that's the tactics used against it. It's very easy to make people not see this. But then what we've done, if you tap into the conspiracy vein and you get into the Christianity realm of conspiracy, then you get into this, blows it all wide open very quickly. And it's kind of like, and I don't think they can keep the lid on this any longer. I really don't.
No, I don't think so either.
I really don't. It's spiraling out of control. Like I made a few videos on it viral because it captures the imagination very quickly. And I didn't intend for that. You know, that wasn't my intention. I just think it's an interesting topic and I wanted to talk about it. But like, my main, like, again, I'll stop there. Maybe we can move on. I'll explain my main issue with the movement itself right now, you know, but that's the theory, and it's incredible. You know, it's incredible. I'll give it to you. Go ahead.
Do you care if I touch on just a few other aspects of primarily like the architecture and the remnants of the millennial reign? Is that okay?
Well, what do you want to know?
Well, so one question that a lot of people bring up that are Americans, and it's an understandable question, is how do you make sense of Native Americans who are existing on this land? They don't have any tales of modern architecture and things like this. And my response to that has always been, well, think how easy it would have been for people who came and found these pieces of architecture and also found other sort of lighter brown skinned people and also dark skinned people inhabiting them. And also some living nomadically. I mean, you look at Brazil right now, for example, there's indigenous people living right next to quote unquote modernized people in Brazil. And there's countless examples of this across the world, right? Indigenous tribes that are either nomadic or just living in one specific area that are still living indigenous ways, living next to modern cities. But how easy would it have been you're already killing off their food supply. You're killing all their buffalo intentionally to starve them out, to take the ones who are surviving and saying, hey, we won't kill you. So long as you adopt this narrative, you teach this narrative to your people, you teach your people that we are the ones who built these buildings, and then we're good and we won't kill you. Okay. When you're faced with that decision, that's an easy decision as a chief of a tribe, right? And there could be some other aspects too. I don't know if you've ever thought along those lines, how Native Americans make sense with this.
I have. Yeah. And that's one good example. Just pure genocide and coercion. That's how you get that narrative to be created. They write the history books. That includes other cultures' histories too. It's simple, you know. It can be that simple. It's just how much are you willing to accept the capacity of mankind's evil and willingness to do such things to others? You know what I mean? That's all it really comes down to. Okay, nothing you can imagine is out of the realms of possibility when it comes to what mankind can do to one another. It's horrible. It's heinous. You know, we need a savior for a reason. You know, that's what I'm saying. And so your theory there is a good one, a sound, solid one, and I can believe it. I was just listening the other day I was reading literally yesterday about what happened to the Selknam people of South America, the Terra del Fuego Islands, I think they are. I can't remember how to pronounce it, but Portuguese, Chilean, Peruvian governments, I think it's like on a border of at the bottom tip there of America. There's this tribe called the Selknam, 4,000 strong when they were discovered. And within 20 years, they were dwindled down to 100. And it was done through literally government funded genocide hunting campaigns. Okay. Where they were paying farmers of the region to gun them down and hunt them and bring skulls and hands of evidence and paying them to genocide and kill these people to solve the indigenous issue because they needed the land to farm. Okay. It's that simple. And they were claiming, well, they were stealing our crops and killing our animals. So we had to get rid of them, you know. That's the counter argument. It's like, no, it doesn't justify genocide. Anyway, it's like 4,000 to 120 years. And this was in, I think it's like 17 something to like 18 something. You know what I mean? Maybe I got the time. Maybe it was 8. Yeah, I think that's about right. Something like that. Horrible genocide. And then I think these people were then the 100 that were left. A lot of their children were orphaned off to white families and Portuguese, Spanish families, and the heritage gone, lost and forgotten, not even documented, you know what I mean? And then the 100 that were left, I mean, they were forced down to an island further south, and then they integrated and moved on, and now the civilization is gone, doesn't exist anymore, and the heritage is dead, completely wiped out, you know? And you listen to those stories, you're like, that is awful. Like, that is like the worst possible thing you could imagine, but that's how bad it can get. That's how bad people are. And it's, again, we don't actually know what these people were like. We don't know. We only know what the victors told us about them. We know what the official anthropologist who was studying them at that time wrote about their histories and who these people in this tribe really were. But I don't trust any of these official anthropologists or, again, I'm writing the book where I read the words of anthropologists and I'm seeing patterns emerge all the time. It's kind of like the anthropologists want to try and remove any form of like spiritualism from everything they discover. That's their aim. Their aim is to make it all about symbolism and metaphor for the animalistic nature of man. Not that these tribes really encountered entities that looked like this. No, that entity just represents an inner feeling they had about their own animalism. It's kind of, that's what they always want to do. And I think a lot of that lying also goes into who they really were and where they actually came from and what they were actually into. And I think all of that. I think many of these tribes have been genocided and removed and dwindled into numbers. Like it's a point where coercion is an easy way to hide the truth. And I think there's another wild theory I've got. This is very wild, by the way. This one is like really out there. Okay.
I'm all for it.
But it's possible, as far as they're concerned, their cultures haven't gone through a reign. Okay. Now hear me out. It says in Revelation, the rest of the dead will get to rule with Christ. So those who died in Christ will be risen from the dead and get to rule with him for 1,000 years. This is the first resurrection. The rest of the dead live not again until the 1,000 years has ended. Okay? So it says. And people say, yeah, but that's for judgment at the end. Yes, if you don't believe in a little season and you don't pay attention to that bit about the little season. What if they're resurrected exactly when the 1,000-year reign ended and they live through the little season before that judgment? What if that's what it's actually telling you? And they'll say, oh, that can't be the case. Because it's appointed to man to die once and then judgment. It's kind of like, well, are you God? Do you get to make that judgment? Do you get to choose who does and doesn't get to live again? And what does it mean to die? Exactly. Do you mean the body or the soul? Like, how do you want to define this? But it says when the 1,000 years has ended, that's when the rest of the dead are resurrected. Could it be
that could make a lot of sense about them being more quote unquote primitive?
Well, could it be that these tribes are just the resurrected tribes that were around before Christ?
Yeah.
And I
could totally see that.
Picked up where they left off in our time in the 1700s.
Yeah.
And they just kept living in the jungles and in the deserts on horses with spears and as they always had done and nothing changed. And as far as they were concerned, like their lineage was unbroken and no time has gone at all. And we're just back and we never even left. And we're just surrounded with all these buildings now, these empty buildings. And it seems like they chose not.
Yeah. Like where do these come from? And then the Freemasons show up right on time. Like, oh, we built these.
Yeah. But they're like, they chose not to live in them. Clearly. You know what I mean? And maybe that's what happened. That's just a wild theory there. I cannot substantiate that with any evidence or claims whatsoever, other than that one verse in the Bible where it says the rest of the dead live after the 1,000 years is ended. So maybe that, but there's a lot there. There's a lot of baggage behind that claim, and I'm not saying that is it. But I'm a conspiracy. I speculate on things. I have ideas, and there's an idea for you. Maybe. It's more likely the genocide and coercion side of things that you said, though, realistically.
I could see that, though, man. I really could. I want to touch on one more thing before we get into what you think has sort of gone wrong with the Christ millennial reign little season movement. I asked about it and we got off topic. That's my fault.
It's all right. That's okay.
Josephus and what he claimed to have seen at that time.
Yeah, so he saw chariots of fire in the heavens raining down missiles onto the earth, basically, is what he's describing happening. And he even says the phrase, I wouldn't even believe that it happened myself if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. Like, that's his writings. That's what he's a first century Jewish historian, quite well respected, known, and there's work been done since then. I can't give you the details now because I haven't looked into it myself, but I know there are other records of other people at the same time who also mentioned seeing the same thing, Roman generals, things like this, So yeah, that is a thing that happened, and it was around 70 AD, the Roman Jewish War. So this happened, I think, in like 69 to 70 AD or 66 when it's about 4-year period, about 3.5 year period, a tribulation time period, like there was this war, wasn't it? The Jewish-Roman war, and it culminated with the destruction of the temple, which Christ said would happen in his generation. In that generation, no stone left. It was going to come down, and he was right. It did happen. But which also implies, well, if that's the case, then the abomination of desolation happened at that time as well. And possibly the mark of the beast around the same time too, which is likely the libellus. This is my theory, which was early Christians at the time were forced to get a signed piece of paper called a libellus. And the only way you can get this signed piece of paper, which gives you permission to buy or sell in Rome, to take part in commerce in Rome, is you have to make sacrifices in the temple of Jupiter, I think it was, which is, the devil. It's Zeus, the temple of Zeus, whatever you want, with many names for the same god. And you have to make sacrifices in the temple, witnessed by a Roman legionnaire, who will then sign the paper and give it to you. Okay? That's a mark of the beast if you've ever heard of one. It's had the right to buy or sell. And that did happen. I think Nero, I think, is the one who put this through. They say it wasn't Nero. They say it was in 96 by somebody else, but I think Nero was the biggest persecutor of Christians that we know of. Okay. And he was burning them as candles, you know what I mean? Just to light his courtyard and this type of thing. I think we've been a bit lied to about who did what and when, but it seems like we can have a mark of the beast example. We could have a destruction of the temple example, an abomination of desolation example. I think it's described that they were sacrificing pigs in the temple before it was destroyed. That's what the Romans were doing, I think it's all there. It all did happen during that Roman Jewish war period, which you're not really told about. No one tells you about this, that this happened, because it would make you suddenly become a preterist. That's what it would do, And then, but Christ hasn't returned yet, though. So we're still waiting 2,000 years, but most of prophecy got fulfilled in the first century. That's preterism. Okay. Partial preterism anyway. Full preterism is that we're past everything now and we're living in the new heaven and earth, which we're not. We don't believe that either. We're in that time period just before the new heaven and earth, and everything has been fulfilled. I mean that Christ has already come back and ruled. That's not, preterists don't believe that. That's the difference. That's the distinction here. They think. And if they do, again, it's the amillennialist. It's a metaphorical reign for 1,000 years. He's in our hearts. He's in humanity's hearts for 1,000 years, and 1,000 years isn't even 1,000 years. It's a very long time. It's a nebulous concept, like at least people didn't understand time when they were writing it, I don't know. But, so that's Josephus. He witnessed this thing. And there's examples for the mark of the beast. There's witnesses to all of these events. And as I mentioned, after that, there's the 536 events, which is just a cataclysmic horror where the sun goes out for 3 months, 3 years. I can't remember. It's a long time. The sun goes black. Everyone starts dying of horrific plagues. People are seeing angels and demons everywhere. People are literally just sweeping bodies into the ocean because they can't bury them anymore. It's a horrible time. Pestilence and sickness and darkness and cold, a mini ice age, they call it, which is because all the volcanoes went off and it matted out the sky, and it's just a horrible time. I think all that happened in the first century. I don't think there is a 500-year gap or anything like that. And I think this also brings massively into question the early church fathers as well. I don't think I think there really were early church fathers before all this cataclysmic horrible stuff happened. And they weren't through that 500-year period that we're told, up to the Byzantine Empire. I think we've been lied to a lot about early Christendom as well. Like lied to massively, in fact. And Jason Jack has done a lot of work on that one, if you haven't heard of him.
I've not heard of him. What's his name again?
Jason Jack. Yeah, he's done a lot of work on the early...
Jason Jack. Okay.
On the early church fathers. Far better than anything I could come up with. He's done the study, and he makes a fantastic case that it was all that you just made up. A lot of these books that we're told were written by these early, they weren't written when they're told they were written. They were very new. In fact, they were only discovered very recently, apparently. You know what I mean? It's kind of, when you actually look into the history where we get these books, we have to question the validity of them massively. You know what I mean? Like massively. And again, it's just more compounding evidence just keeps going on top of the stack that is adding weight to this little season theory. It's multifaceted. And people want like a one answer explanation, like a one word, a one sentence explanation. I'll prove it. What about this? It's kind of like, no, listen, this is study. You got to study this out. There's so much to look into here. It's not just simply that the words of Jesus said he was coming back in that time. Well, that should be enough, by the way. That should be enough. But it's not just that. There's so much more to look into. And we've just touched on the surface here. This is surface stuff, you know. And I recommend anybody go out there and actually go and look into it. I really do. And again, you won't find much new on my channel anymore. I don't make new content on it because I've said everything.
Highly recommend watching your content on it though, that you have made, because it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's been there. It's over a year. There's collaborations as well. And my podcast visits are on there with the people kind of giving presentations, you know, trying to explain it for the first time. It's kind of like what we did today, but a bit more detailed. This is, again, just a very brief overview and touching on points. And again, it's something I believe. I think it's the truth, but it's not something I lead anymore, because maybe we can get into it. You know, I think the movement.
Yeah, let's get into that. Yeah.
I think it's a shame, but I think the movement has turned into a denomination, a new denomination. And it's a shame because I don't want to be in a denomination, you know, and that's it. That's basically it summarized very quickly what the main issue is. The word cult has been bandied around against it quite a lot, even against me as the cult leader in a way, you know, and I don't want to be a cult leader. I don't want to start a cult. I don't want to start a denomination. I'm not interested in that. That wasn't the point of this. The point is I want people to believe that Christ told the truth. And that's it. I want people to believe in Jesus. That's all the only reason I do anything I do, you know, and that's what my channel has always been about. But because I was inadvertently in a quote unquote leadership position, I just talked about it a lot and a lot of people watched. Therefore, by de facto, people consider me kind of like a figurehead, you know, but it's kind of like, I'm not, I'm just some guy who talks too much in his office. I really am not a leader of this, you know, I just have ideas and I want to get them out. And people, I think for some reason started treating me like a threat because they wanted to be in control of the whole thing. And perhaps maybe I'm not the Christian they want me to be, or they think I should be. I think a lot of people who came out of futurist dispensationalist churches have a very religious spirit. And they were always counting down the days and setting dates and times for when Christ would return for tribulation. That they just taken that mentality and mindset and applied it to the little season theology instead. So now they're all about when's judgment coming? When's the Gog-Magog war? How long do we have left? What date do we have? And they've done the exact same thing, just moved over to the little season to do it. And it's the wrong spirit. It's the wrong spirit as far as it's not, I don't want to be a part of another church that does this, you know. I just want to be a follower of Jesus and have fellowship with other believers, but I'm not going to divide myself from the body of Christ over eschatology. And that started to happen. A lot of people started to argue with people who didn't believe in the little season as though they're evil for not believing in the little season. What, you don't believe the words of Jesus? What are you? You call yourself a Christian? You know, it's that type of attitude. It's kind of, whoa, slow down. You know, I tried to do this. I did try my best to temper people's attitudes and say that don't talk to your brothers and sisters like that. Like, you didn't even know about this a year ago. You know what I mean? Like, have some patience, give them a chance. You know, it's kind of, yeah, they don't believe you. Why should they believe you? Who are you? Who am I? You know what I mean? I'm just some guy on YouTube saying stuff. Why should they believe me? You know, give it time, plant the seed, let it be watered, you know, don't drown it out. It's kind of like but that's not a lot of little season people who got into it, got so zealous about it. They were attacking those who were defending futurism against it. It's kind of like, well, what do you expect? They've literally been following it for 30 years. You think it's going to drop everything because you said so, you know? And I didn't like any of it. I really didn't like any of it. But I think because I was so tempered and reasoned about the whole situation, I think those zealot types saw me as like a weak, pathetic, you shouldn't even be talking about this. And by the way, maybe you're a shill. You're here to make us weak. You're here to lead the movement down that weak, you know, and they started having that attitude towards me, like I'm evil. And it got to the point where it's like, I've defended this community against accusations of cult for a long time, but maybe a spade's a spade sometimes, you know, maybe that's what happened.
I dealt with the exact same thing, man. So I became relatively well known for sharing about the no virus position and speaking to it with pretty good level of knowledge.
Is that terrain theory you're talking about? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, exactly. It's essentially that. Yeah, exactly. And I found there were a lot of people, mostly the range of 4,000 to 8,000 follower accounts on X and elsewhere, many of whom were totally unnamed. They had some fake profile picture and didn't reveal their true identity, but had become so cult-like to where I produced a series in 2023 that involved some people who were not strictly quote unquote no virus or terrain in their understanding. And those people called me a shill, saying I was trying to lead people down the wrong direction for simply trying to bridge the gap. It was vocal about my perspective on terrain and no virus, but I was also welcoming of people who are not, because I'm like, hey, let's all talk about this together. Let's flesh this out. And the same exact thing happened with me. So I totally understand where you're coming from on that.
Well, that's what happened. They the little Caesar community definitely segregated themselves and create enclaves that are closed off. And it's exactly the problem with the modern church as it is already. We don't need, the last thing Christianity needs is a new denomination. I'm sorry. That's not what it needs. And I didn't want to, again, alienate myself from the broader body of Christ based on eschatology alone. Like, it doesn't matter when you are. All that matters is that you believe in Jesus and you get other people to find him before it's too late. You know, that's all that matters. That's our job, isn't it? Like, just make more disciples. Let them go out and make more disciples. And that's it. That's all we're supposed to be doing. Everything else is kind of trivial, really. It's fun, sure, you know, but you shouldn't be defining yourself by it. And that's what a lot of people started to do. They define themselves by the little season thing because it is so inspiringly, overwhelmingly life-changing. I can get that, but you were a Christian before and you're a Christian now. You shouldn't make your identity surrounding about how it ends. You know what I mean? Like, and it never sat right with me. It never did. And it got to the point where these trollish, horrible attacks were coming against me quite regularly, like I explained at the start, you know, and I could see the impact it was having on my family. And I just made a choice. It's like, I'm out. Like, I'm not a leader of this thing. I don't want to be seen as a leader of this thing. And it got to the point as well where I was just making content saying the same thing over and over again. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. And I've said this before in other shows, you know, you make a lot of money talking about it. A lot of money because there's thousands of people watching those videos and that's all I had to revenue at the end of the day. And, you know, I had people just sending me thousands of pounds for no reason. It didn't feel right. I started to feel like this is wrong. Like, because I think the people saw me as like a pastor and you're supposed to tithe, you know, so they gave me that money as the
pastor of this new denomination.
This is what I mean. Yeah. It's like, I've never said I was a pastor or a spiritual leader or anything like that. And it's odd, you know, it's odd. And he gave no explanation for why they sent the money either. And it's it's so weird. You know, I got to the point where it's like, I can't do this. I can't. I'm out, you know, like my work is there. I believe it. Go and research it, but I'm beating a dead horse now. I don't think there's anything new I can add to the body of work. I've understood that conspiracy. You know, I get it. I've incorporated it into my worldview and I go through life now with that lens as a possibility always and forever, you know. And other people should too, but I'm not looking to stay there. I'm not looking to be a little seasoned channel. I've always been a channel about all things conspiracy, you know, and I've always had my other missions of helping people deal with spiritual warfare, with demonic attack and understanding human history through that lens and biblical history and the Nephilim and all that type of thing. I'm a teacher in that respect, you know, but I'm a bit of a therapist. I want to talk to people. I want them to share and open up about their experiences with learning the truth. And I want to teach people how to handle it better and how to be better ambassadors for the truth. And I'm also fundamentally at the bottom line of everything I do, I want to bring people to Christ. And sure, the Little Caesar is a great way to do that, but there are other ways. You know, there are other ways. And I'm not going to pigeonhole myself, you know, but then I've literally had some horrible messages from people saying like, well, Paul's a pussy now. I'm unsubscribing, you know, this type of thing because he won't talk about this topic anymore. It's kind of like you people are the reason I left. You people right there saying that kind of stuff. If you're not talking about this, then you're a shill. If you're not talking about this one topic that I think you need to be talking about, you're not worthy of my subscription. It's kind of like, well, go somewhere else then.
Right.
It's like, I don't care. Like, it's not like my problem. I'm not here to like talk about what you want me to talk about. Like, that's not my, what do you want from me? Like, no, I'm not a puppet. Like, I'm a person with thoughts and ideas and I want to explore all of them. And I want to go down many avenues, you know, and again, I've made my mission clear, and most people have respected it, but there's just there's just this undercurrent within that community that is vitriolically obsessive and overzealous and vicious, and they brought with them this religious spirit, which probably comes from the church background. I'm not going to lie, and it's sad, because it really is sad, because I believe in that theory. I do. But I don't believe in the cult that's been created around that theory. And a part of me, call me a conspiracy theorist, feels like it's a bit of a controlled opposition thing going on. There's a bit of a co-opting and leading it down a bad route thing going on, tarnishing its image thing happening. So from the outside looking in, it does look like a cult, because they're behaving like a cult. So no one's going to want to listen to them. I feel like that's what's happening.
Could totally see that.
I feel that's my opinion. I could be wrong. I'm not naming names or anything. You know what I mean? It's not like I'm trying to, because I don't know who is or isn't. I can't make those claims. I don't know people's hearts, who isn't like a shill or anything. I don't know. I can't possibly know that. But come on. I've seen this happen with every big truth movement topic. Someone's a fed somewhere. It happens, things get infiltrated. That's how it works, so we have to be wary of that. And I think there are a lot of people who listen to little seasoned content creators who are like just so implicitly trustworthy about them and hang on to their every word, and have made idols out of even the teachers of this thing in a way, which I don't think is healthy. It should always be about Christ first. And there's just such a holier than thou attitude with some of them as well. It just gets really bad. Like it's just not my scene anymore. It stopped being my scene, so that's what I think of it. That's my opinion on the whole situation now, is why I kind of distance myself from the culture of Little Season, but the information's solid. I'll say that.
I appreciate that, man. That means you have integrity. And you make it more about the information in Christ than, all the cult-like aspects of it. I really, really appreciate that. Well, thank you for being willing to share it here on this channel, given that, you're kind of over talking about it at this point. I do have just one more question, not related specifically to this, but it kind of relates. Does the idea of the little season and Christ's millennial reign, change the way that we look at the modern nation state of Israel in any way?
Yeah, it's fake.
Yeah. That's what I thought.
So there's nothing else to say.
But that stands separate of whether or not we're in the midst of the little season right now, right?
Oh yeah, I mean the whole Balfour Declaration nonsense, all of that. All of it was set up as a falsity from the very beginning. All of it. Yeah, but with the little season lens, it makes a lot more sense, because there has to be Jerusalem, right?
It makes a lot more sense.
There has to be Jesus is going to reign from somewhere when he comes back at the millennial reign, So let's just make it this random little desert that's been nothing but a wasteland for a long, 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 long time before they suddenly got a hold of it and built there, And it's kind of, let's make it this place. It fits the narrative. It's good enough, I mean, I'm a really alternative history type person. I think that the place is completely different. I think it might even be America, where it all really went down originally. You know what I mean? You want to talk about like the Mount of Olives being split. Look at the Grand Canyon. There's a huge split in the ground, which goes north and south, as it's described in the Bible, where literally it's been torn apart. I think that could be a good example. And why is everything there named after Egyptian places in Egypt? You know what I mean? Like, you have to wonder. Like, you really have to wonder. I'm thinking, God, we've been lied to about everything. That includes geography. And I think what we have today is Masonic theater. And it's a cheap simulacrum at best as well. So that's my theory on it all.
Amen, man. Totally agree. There's a recent poll that I put out on all my social media channels, and 95% of people responded that they're struggling to find their health and freedom community in person. And don't get me wrong, these platforms, these devices that you're listening to or watching this podcast on right now are great for helping to disseminate information, helping us, find like-minded people to validate us, but they are not a replacement for real in-person community. At the core of our new community platform is a powerful, easy-to-use map helping you to instantly connect with like-hearted, like-minded community, including men and women, farms, schools, practitioners of all types, and other businesses near you. The platform also includes groups, social functions, messaging, and Platinum members also get access to our content library with footage from all of our in-person and virtual events like Confluence and the end of COVID, as well as breathwork sessions, Qigong sessions, member Q&As, and also member community calls. So if you'd like to support this podcast and support our mission of helping people to connect hyper-locally in person, and also obviously support yourself in the process, go to the show notes or just go to thewayforward.com/join. And again, the way forward is spelled thewayforward.com/join to become a member today. Help us build the way forward for mankind. If you wouldn't mind just sharing up a little bit, I know we've been going for quite a while and I want to respect your time, just a little bit about Nephilim look like clowns.
Sure. So,
and what you talk about in that.
So this is my main body of work, my baby. This is something I started in 2016, a couple of years after I started the channel, really. And like I said, I'm a biblical history guy. Like, I really like to understand and bring the narrative of the Nephilim to the forefront of what I do. Because I think, again, it's one of those topics that brings alive the Bible in a way that my generation needs. Because as wonderful as the stories are, it can be a bit dry. You know, Sunday school and the Bible and the pastors preaching to you and this type of thing. And I think my generation needs something to actually hook them in a bit more. The gospel is enough, though. Don't get me wrong. Like, the gospel speaks on a level in the soul that goes deeper than anything. But I think a lot of people struggle to get past the genocide, for example, in the early parts of the Bible, or the flood. Why would God do that? Seems a bit unnecessary, doesn't it? Because people are just behaving a bit badly. Didn't he make people anyway? Why is he killing them for just being what they are? You know, people have these, and these are obviously, you know, they sound childish arguments to us now, but these are legitimate concerns for people who don't believe. They need answers to this. Well, when you bring the Nephilim into the equation, suddenly everything makes a lot more sense very quickly. The corruption that was going on during that time and why it was so corrupt suddenly it becomes apparently blatantly obviously clear. And I think I'm not trying to apologize on behalf of God or anything, I think he was wholly justified in everything he did. And I think the Nephilim can bolster that justification for why mankind was behaving so badly during that time. Not just the Nephilim. Man was terrible too. You know, we have responsibility to take in why those actions were taken. And I think because no one talks about the Nephilim in the church, I think you're laying the foundation there for people not only to fall away, but also no one new to come in, because there's no real answer for all this early genocide. Like, why kill the men, women, and children in the lands of Canaan? Well, when you bring in the genetic corruption aspect, suddenly those things get a lot more justified. It was necessary if you want humanity to survive. Do you get what I mean? It's not just a case of, well, I just don't like those people. It's not that simple, you know. It's like, no, they're genetically corrupted, and if we let them continue, there won't be humanity in like a few generations' time. There's bigger arguments to be made that it's kind of like, it's necessary. Like, and these are choices you don't want to make. Thank God we have a God that can make those choices for us. You know, it's that type of thing. And it is always inspired me in those early days. And I was listening to a lot of big researchers when I first started talking about the Nephilim narrative, you know. And as an artist, I was never satisfied with the descriptions or the images that were being shown of the Nephilim. They always looked like just really, really hench Conan the Barbarian types with tan skin and big brown dreadlocks and like clubs and loincloths on, you know, and I made of animal skin. And it's kind of, I really don't think they would have looked like that. I really do not, based on the descriptions of how these things came about. So we're talking about angels here mixing with human women. Okay. Now, angels, if you look at like any other culture outside of the Bible, they don't really talk about men with wings walking around, but they talk about dragons everywhere, dragons all over the place. I think the angels, the watchers, the ones that came to Mount Hermon, were dragons in one form. Seraphim angels, fiery flying serpents. Okay. And I think they
make sense of gargoyles on buildings, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah,
as watchers,
so many things get made sense here when you bring the dragon aspect into it, you know. And I think all human history is biblical history, whether it's canonized into what we call the Bible or not. Wherever you go on the earth, where they're telling you the history, that's biblical history. It's all God's story. It's all his story. Okay. It's just told from a perspective of an unbeliever and what they were living through during history of God and creation of man and mankind's history with God as at the helm as a creator. And there was a lot of cultures who worshipped dragons and their offspring. Okay. My work brings that to the forefront. The whole point of my work is to bring people to Christ. I've told you this from the start. Everything I do in this book, The Nephilim Look Like Clowns, is a hook to get that generation interested in biblical history and to trap them with the gospel. It's a gospel trap. They're falling into a pit of the gospel when they get into the book, you know. But they need the clown as that hook to get them interested. Like, what? Clowns? What are you talking about? Anyway, it turns out when I started my research into this, it got out of hand. I didn't know it would go as deep as it did. It just did. And it turns out what we call the clown is quite literally a representation of a demon. And I'm not even joking. This, historically speaking, that is exactly what it actually is. And I explain this history thoroughly in the book and on my channel. But if I can give a brief elevator summary, we had this movement come out of Europe after the collapse of Rome called the Commedia dell'arte. And it was a band of traveling actors. Okay. Now the Commedia dell'arte did like, it's kind of like the first circus in a way. They were a troupe of actors who went from village to village, whipped up a quick stage, did some performances in the town square, took some money in a hat, moved on to the next town. They were traveling performers. And they had stock characters with the way they wore masks. And these stock characters means no matter where they go, people will know who they're supposed to be. The rich man, the soldier, the dunce, the whatever, you know, the woman. It's like they have like these stock stereotypes, which the mask was. So as time goes on, a new character gets introduced after 1,000 years. So 1,500 AD. And it's called Harlequin. You've heard of Harlequin, the tight leotard, diamond shaped, pattern wearing clown thing, you know? And he was introduced quite late in the game because they needed a new stock character. Because no matter where they went in Europe, everyone had something called the wild man. That's like a tradition where they would dress in these crazy hairy costumes with huge grimaces and sharp teeth and bulging eyes and horns and multicolors everywhere and bells and do these crazy dances and then drink and eat loads of stuff and have sex and do crazy things. And then they would fast for a period, you know, and it got highly Catholicized. So it got associated with Ash Wednesday, the period before the fasting period before Lent, you know, but really the ancient tradition, it's called the wild man tradition. It's a Celtic, Teutonic, Nordic tradition based in Dionysus worship Thracian cults from like Bulgaria and the Mediterranean, kind of mixed in with these strange Greek gods, you know, where they would have this excessive party and venerate these hybrid monster giant creatures covered in hair. So it's a Nephilim worship cult, basically. And the European version of the Nephilim is called the Wild Man. And he's a giant with a club who wanders the forests and has a band of merry demons follow him everywhere and all this type of thing, you know. And these traditions basically created Harlequin, which was the first proto-clown character modeled after European demons called the Wild Man. And demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. And I think it's possible some Nephilim were still knocking about in Europe at this point. Who knows? You know, eyewitness accounts say so. Yeah, but then after that, that movement has traveled all throughout Europe and established like theaters. And in London, there's a character called Clown who works with Harlequin. They're like a duo. They bounce off of each other on the stage, you know, and they have a comedy act. And that's because originally it was Harlequin and Pedrolino, the Italian tradition where it comes from Rome. And Pedrolino was the servant of the rich man. And so was Harlequin. But Harlequin was really smart. Pedrolino was really dumb. So the comedy comes from these two bashing together, you know what I mean? And not really doing the master's work, you know, and Harlequin tries to steal the daughter of the rich man, the boss, then runs away with her. And then it's up to the boss and the dumb servant to chase after them, you know. That's the joke. That's the show. And in Britain, it took a new flavor. And Pedrolino became clown because clown was a word in Britain for clodhopper or fool. It's like a colloquial term, you know. And the clown had always dressed in a white servant rag with a fluffy ruffle, soft, no starch, no money, you know, so it wasn't thick and hard. And he was always white, nothing, no color whatsoever, no color. And this is where you get Poirot, the French clown, with the black pom-poms and the white thing and the white cone, you know, and because it's based on Pedrolino, the white servant rag thing, you know. But the French version was sad and boring and always crying all the time and woe is me, why doesn't Columbine love me? Why does she love Harlequin? Proper French style sad sack clown, you know. But in Britain, he was like a drunk sausage eating maniac and just didn't care about his boss at all, you know what I mean? And just was out for himself, and really he was just like vicious and cruel and funny and just ridiculous. And he was better than Harlequin in terms of comedy in Britain. He was funnier than the Harlequin character, who was supposed to be all of those things originally, witty and funny and charming, but he kind of became boring as time went on. And this demonic, cheeky clown in Britain was way funnier. So suddenly in the 1800s, this is like 300 years after like Harlequin was introduced into the tradition. In the 1800s, the son of a very famous Freemason called Charles Dibdin Jr., and I've got all the records to prove this, member of the fraternity, everything, intimately linked with India, had a brother colonizing India at the time with the East India Company. He never left and lived in India himself, and he was going to, but his ship got stopped because of bad weather, and you don't sail in bad weather in the 1800s, so you die, you know, so that's why he didn't go and never went in the end. But his brother ended up dying out there, but I think he knew a lot about Indian iconography, especially demonic iconography. And if you go to India, they have their version of the Nephilim, which are called the Rakshasas and the Asuras. And the Asuras are like the good Nephilim, and the Rakshasas are like the evil cousins, but they look identical. They put them together, they're the same thing, you know, same monster. Big, wide, cheeky grin, buck fangs, multicolored, crazy pattern skin, wild, bulging eyes, this suit that has multicolored patterns all over it. They look like a clown by any standards. And lo and behold, clown on the British stage, suddenly no longer dressed in white servant rags. His costume was changed for the first time in over 1,000 years to multicolored, fractal patterned, crazy, wild, fractal clown clothing that we know of today. Never happened before until this son of a Freemason who knew India very well took over and tried to change the costume of a clown. And that's when Indian demons were injected into British theatre through the clown character. So, historically speaking, Harlequin or clown have always been dressed to look like a demon. Just a European flavor with Harlequin, the Indian flavor of Nephilim with the clown. So literally speaking, clowns are representations of Nephilim. But that's not what my work then goes on to look at cultures all over the earth. And they have what are called ancestor spirit worship cultures. So these cultures basically dress like the thing to channel the spirit of the thing in their rituals and dances. So they wear the costume of a spirit, and they want to be possessed by the spirit to then let it communicate through them and get stuff from it. It's a transactional deal, you know. And what they dress like are clown costumes by our standard of descriptions, because they are dressing like something specific to get in touch with something specific on the other side of the veil. And that is the DMT jesters, as have popularly been understood and known, you know.
That is so wild. I was just about to say that. That is crazy.
Which are the disembodied spirits of the original Nephilim, which looked like clowns, because they are hybrids of dragons mixed with humans. And when you mix a snake, a dragon, with a human, you get what looks like a clown. You get a white-skinned, big, wide grinning, big, bulging-eyed, fang, buck tooth, multicolored patterns all over the white skin monster, which from our standards, with crazy red hair, by the way, you know, looks like a clown. And that's because they are the synonymous of the same thing. And my work details this. It goes through all these cultures and shows what they wear to channel these spirits. And you see a pattern emerge. It's always the same thing. White skin, red hair, multicolored pattern, fractal clothing. That is a clown by a Western standard. And that's because by Western standards, the clown is the same costume being worn by these other cultures. In the West, we're just not supposed to know that that's what it's for. So when you wear that costume, you are channeling the spirits of the Nephilim, just like all these other cultures do. But in the West, it's occult. It's hidden. And those who are in the secret societies know this. That's why you have a clown sect within every shrine occult. They all dress like clowns to fund their hospitals, remember, you know. And that's why a step above shrining is the Royal Order of the Jesters. Okay, they know this. They brought the clown to the West, and they invented and nurtured and protected the image of a clown. They own all the circuses, always have. Freemasons have always owned all circuses, and the Shriners today own pretty much all the American circuses, because it's an in-house, it's all in-house. And they did this. They brought this occult practice of channeling spirits through this costume into the West, but hid it under the layer of, it's just a fun thing for the kids. It's just a clown. It's just something silly. But that's not what it really means to the initiated. So like I said, when I started pulling at this thread, more just kept coming. And now the whole sweater's come unraveled, and I've got 2 books in the works now, and it's just ridiculous. I have like 46 episodes in the series, and yeah, it just keeps going. So that's my work in a nutshell. Very quickly summarized, but I have done hours of presentations on this. I have thoroughly explored this concept for over a decade. Yeah.
That was amazing, man. It's interesting. That makes sense of why I've always been disturbed, and so many other people have said they've always been disturbed by clowns, no matter how fun, quote unquote, they look. One thing that comes up for me regarding the DMT thing, I have never personally done synthetic or natural DMT, whether it's 5-MeO DMT, like the frog DMT, or the synthetic version. And say what you want about plant medicines and things like this. I have a lot of conflicting thoughts on that. I know a lot of people have received benefit from it. I've only ever done psilocybin. I've never sat with ayahuasca or anything like this. With that being said, there's something about choosing a natural substance in a very ceremonial way versus doing a synthetic version of it. And it's interesting that when people specifically do the synthetic version of DMT, they often find these clown jester figures in those realms that they venture into. And I think it's something about they're not engaging with a natural substance that is derived from nature, that was ultimately created by God or derivatives of, God over time, but rather creating or entertaining a substance that was impressed upon by man, made in a laboratory in a synthetic way that sort of creates a void where, sometimes benevolent, sometimes malevolent spirits enter into legitimate medicine ceremonies. That's a whole separate topic. But nonetheless, when you have a synthetic counterfeit version of the natural substance, it creates a vacuum that other spirits can then fill associated with that substance. And that's what you're coming across possibly. That's always been sort of my thought when it comes to the synthetic DMT. And it's so crazy you said that right as I was thinking it. I was like, that makes sense of the jester character that people see when they do synthetic versions of DMT.
Yeah, I have a slightly different take. I mean, I come from a psychedelic background myself. I have done the synthetic DMT you're talking about there, as well as psilocybin, LSD, and all the rest of it. That's who I was before I was saved. Looking for answers, looking for God, basically, and having these psychedelic experiences and exploring these realms. And I think all psychedelics or entheogens give you a different flavor of the same place. I think no matter where you go, the psychedelic place is the earth. I don't think it's separate from us. I don't think there is like a spirit realm and then our realm. I think it's the exact same place. Our perception of it is just limited. I don't think you're leaving the earth when you go to the psychedelic realm. I think you're in the exact same spot. You're just viewing it through a more opened up lens, shall we say. And I think our perception was limited for a reason. I think after the flood, God set a rainbow in the sky. And I think he did that because he limited our vision to the bandwidth of the color spectrum that we know of today. And I think there's a reason for that, because now there's parasites infesting the earth in spirit form called the Nephilim. And I think to protect us from communicating with them, he cut off our ability to perceive them and hear them anymore and see them. So I think humanity in the past, and I think the Aboriginals of like Australia call this like the dreaming. You know what I mean? They used to be able to see the spirit realm and the physical realm simultaneously. And it was normal. It was all one thing. It was one happening, But we don't do that anymore. We don't live in the dreaming anymore, as they describe it. We now live in this cold physical realm that we call earth and physicality, and the five senses and the color spectrum. And I think that's the limited bandwidth. And I think it's a mercy to protect us from the parasite that's now on the earth, which is the Nephilim spirits. I think that these entheogens get you to open up your perception to see that world again. But each drug has like a way of doing it that's different from each other. And like when you take LSD, it's more clinical and sharp and focused, and you're seeing the spirit realm in like this ultra focused, defined illustration, graphic style way. But when you take psilocybin, it's more gloopy and bubbly and earthy and liquidy and and
flowy. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, right? But then when you take DMT, it's hyperclinical and crystal clear, and you're right there, consciously aware, in both your physical body and the spirit. You're there. You break through completely 100% exactly how it probably would have been in the dreaming, I would say.
Have you done 5-MeO DMT though? Like the frog version of DMT, the non-synthetic one?
No, I've done the crystal version. It's synthesized. It's not synthetic. It's just synthesized from biomatter. You know what I mean?
Yeah, synthesized. Yeah.
Yes, I've done that, the crystal version. I've not licked a toad or anything. Like, I've not gone that far, and that's it as far as my I've done salvia divinorum too. I don't know if you've done that one. That one's extreme. It's equally as powerful as DMT, but more psychosis inducing. Like, none of it makes sense. It's chaos when you take salvia. You can't,
I don't like that,
function or think straight, or you're on a loop.
What was the integration like with that?
Impossible. You can't integrate. You are lost, and you've lost your sense of self and identity and everything, but not in like a good way. More like I'm now like an idiot walking around no man's land. I don't even know what's going on. But when you're on DMT, it's more like I'm here, I'm me. I haven't lost my sense of self, but I've also transcended it at the same time. That's what you think. You haven't really, there's nothing more egotistical than thinking you've lost your ego is all I'm going to say, but like, you're definitely in that realm, that space. And when there, unfortunately, although the place itself is perfectly normal, it's God's creation. It is the creation, and you're now seeing the code of the matrix that makes up the reality, seeing the math in everything, the geometry in all things, the things that make up life as it is, the plumbing of the universe, I call it. It's like, it's necessary. It's how where we live functions that needs to happen behind the scenes in order for this to happen here right now. I think it's completely normal, healthy, natural, God-made, beautiful, inspiring, and a testimony to his creation. But it's infested with demonic parasites, and it's now a war zone. So if you go there, not aware of that problem, you're fodder. You're a plaything to these things. Like, he doesn't even know who we are, or what we are, or why we're here. Let's tell him we're the Palladians from the fifth dimension, and we're here to help his consciousness expand towards their level. Let's just mess with him, you know what I mean? Like, but really what they are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. They've been here for a long time. They're not dumb. They know who you are. They've probably been watching you for a while, probably even vicariously feeding off you in a way, making you do things that they love, and using your senses to feel those things, That's what possession is, using your body for their gains, and then suddenly you end up blasting open your senses and you can see them while they were waiting for you. So now they're going to tell you anything, and they know what you'll believe, and they know what's going to be good for them. So that's why the stories are never consistent with the people who encounter these things when they explain who they are and what they are. But then when you finally do kind of break away from them, and you start to clue in, that's when they reveal who they actually are. That's when you get attacked. That's what I found from my own experience and through other people's experiences. And their true nature is they're a jester, they're a clown, they are irreverent, they hate you, they want you dead. And if they can't have you, nobody can. If you're not going to be useful to them anymore, they'd rather have you dead than saved. So that's what they'll do. And that's it. That's our problem. That's why we're not supposed to be messing around with pharmakia anymore or communicating with spirits, because they are liars. Their father is the father of all lies. It's simple. They will not tell you the truth because they do not have the truth in them. The way all the life, they hate you. You are the enemy. And if you don't get that, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble when you go there. So that's why I'd say, it doesn't matter what drug you take to get there, or what aesthetical style it looks like when you get there. You're dealing with the same thing every time. Just a different flavor of it, It's demons, bro. It's a good way to describe it. Just stay away. Don't mess with them. Don't listen to what they have to say. And yes, they tend to look like clowns. Not always. There's some nuance, but if you look at the reptile kingdom, there's a lot of nuance there too. They're not all the same. There's a lot of variation of a snake, and that's why I'm saying, don't just have some discernment. Be careful. Not all that glitters is gold. Just because they tell you something doesn't mean it's true. Interdimensional entities can lie too. A lot of people don't know that. They assume benevolence every time. Why?
Do you think there is benevolent entities in those realms too? And then like a very...
There's angels.
Yeah, a very spiritually attuned person might be able, if they have that understanding going into
but an angel,
a plant medicine ceremony.
An angel can be physical too, and we can see them. You could be entertaining angels unaware at any time, you know. The difference is between an angel and a demon is that they can't have a physical body anymore. They can't come back to this side of the veil. And that's why they hate you. That's why they possess you. That's the whole point of it, you know. That's why we have unclean spirits. That's why we have a demon problem. That's why Christ came and gave us the ability to cast them out. And a lot of his ministry was casting demons out of people because they've been having a free ride for so long until he came up, you know. And I think there's power in giving people their authority to tread on serpents back. And I think that's why I focus on this on my channel a lot, because I think these are practical tools people can apply to their life tangibly when they need to, that will bring them to Christ and show that the power in his name and his authority. Which is why I like to focus on this more so, because I think, like I said, there isn't a human being alive on this earth who has not encountered a demon. Okay. You can't not bump into them. They're everywhere. But there's just varying degrees of how much they're willing to admit it. That's it. So I don't care if you want to admit it or not. Just make sure you call on Jesus when it happens. All right. That's all I care about. Yeah, go.
It's interesting. A friend of mine who's a psychiatrist said as during his time working in a psych hospital, there are often times when they couldn't figure out what was wrong with a certain person that was deemed like clinically insane. And they would either say the Lord's Prayer or just call upon the name of Jesus. And then that person would instantly be okay. And this is someone who themselves is not a professed Christian. And they admitted that, like, no, you call upon the name of Jesus. There's something unique about that name that causes these people to come back to and get out of what appears to be a possession.
Have you talked to Jerry Marzinski? Okay. So Jerry Marzinski was a clinical psychologist. He worked in the prison system, with inmates regularly and schizophrenics specifically. And when dealing with schizophrenia, not a religious man, very much of the, doctors, PhD of the book, the DSM-5, all the rest of it, And he started to realize that these schizophrenics, they're not having individual delusions. They're having the same delusion. They're all having the same experience. And that shouldn't happen in schizophrenia. It doesn't make sense. He basically discovered, it's demons. It really is.
Wow.
Man, he's now out there saying that and professing that and explaining that. He's probably been stripped.
What's his name? Jerry Marzinski?
Jerry Marzinski. I've had him on my channel. He's been on many people. He's doing the circuit. He has been for a few years. You can talk to him. And he talks about his experiences with calling them out, basically, in these schizophrenic patients and having like electronic phenomena happen. He's saying like what's the voice? What are the voice? And it's like the voices come out and start speaking to him through the person. And it's kind of like, what are the voices saying now? It's like they're telling me to kill you. And this type of, all these stories, everything you can imagine, and he's saying like, for everything he's done and tested, the Lord's Prayer and Psalm 23, they hate it.
Interesting.
Every schizophrenic patient, and he's basically healing these people through bringing them to Christ. I don't think he's even realizing it. He's like, I'm not even a Christian. Like, this is ridiculous. I think it's one of those type of things.
Wow.
It's just, and that's why his testimony, well, it's even his testimony, his story, because I don't even know if he's come to Christ or not. I have to catch up with him and find out. But even he is finding this, he has no reason to lie to you about it. He's no vested interest in spreading Christianity. Do you know what I mean? But he's saying like, they hate Psalms 23. They hate it. Like, he's tested this.
That's so interesting.
And it is interesting. So Jerry Marzinski, I'd recommend it. But what you were just saying there, kind of aligns with his work massively. And I definitely recommend it.
Wow.
But again, it just goes to show like, it's all spiritual in nature. We're in the middle of a spiritual war, and what the world wants to deem like mental illness, schizophrenia. We're dealing with something else. We're dealing with something else here. And people don't like to think like this because they're scared of being called primitive or, taking step backwards in advancements of humanity and all these type of things. So if you consider what I said about the little season earlier, you're already under a delusion. You've been lied to about everything. I mean that. Everything. So when it comes to stuff like this, even if you're suffering from schizophrenia yourself, anyone listening, or mental illness of any kind, do not rule out the spiritual aspect. Do not rule out the true history of humanity, which is documented not only in the Bible, but also every single earthly culture that exists on every continent tells you these things existed. Okay? They tell you. And that's what my work's doing, is bringing it all together to prove the Bible's telling you the truth. Don't you have to realize this. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood. It's Ephesians 6:12. Read Ephesians 6:12 if you haven't already. He lays it out very clear. Yeah, there you go.
Dude, thank you so much for joining me. This has been absolutely incredible. We didn't even get into some other things I wanted to get into, but I'll have you back at some point. One of the topics that would have been really interesting to discuss is when it comes to the law, our ability to fall back into biblical law, because that is what all systems, whether they acknowledge it or not, are really operating under. And a lot of people having success using equity with the biblical backing in order to obtain remedy in various ways. That's a whole separate topic, but it relates to this. Yeah, there's so many other things we could get into. But dude, thank you so much for joining me. This has been absolutely epic.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.